4 people have passed from our church. So it's rough. And we've got Ed Darnell, who's really struggling right now. So Sylvia's really struggling with her health. So it's good. We were fortunate, we were blessed. I think we only had 1 last year that we lost. This year is hard already. So we're gonna by the end of the year, hopefully it won't be any more than 4, but it's not looking good. So I think we'll do something, offer some things for the congregation, for the community on grief. And I think that would be very helpful. So let's read Mark 14 as we open. And you know what? He goes through this, I believe, in the film. So we're not going to read that. I believe in the video he does that. And I've already talked too long. So last week, we rushed through the final couple points in the lesson because we were running out of time. So I want to return to last week's lesson, to the end of last week's lesson, by emphasizing what I feel is a very important point. In the context, if you remember last week, toward the end, of Judas' impending betrayal, which Jesus predicted, Hamilton points out at the bottom of page 21, the top of page 22, that here's what he says. If you go to the bottom of page 21, again, this is last week's lesson. I'm in the wrong book. No wonder I'm wrong. So the bottom of page 21, it says, so he's talking about the betrayal, and he talks about the winds winding its way through the rest of the gospel accounts of the last 24 hours of Jesus. Before the night was over, he says, Judas would betray Jesus, Peter would deny him, and the disciples would desert him, leaving Jesus utterly alone as he faced trial at the hands of his enemies. So he talks about that at the bottom of page 21, and the top of page 22, he talks about how Jesus was alone. And you remember I asked the question, was he alone? And if you remember, I turned to a passage in John 32 and 33. So John's talking to his disciples in chapter 16. So in John 16, 32 and 33, in the context of what I've just said, he said, indeed, the hour is coming, yes, has now come that you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet, he says, I am not alone, for the Father is with me. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. So the answer to the question, is Jesus alone? No. And I leaders, on page 817 we are now, he infuriated the religious leaders that controlled the temple. And the timeline continues, and he says, Jesus returned to the temple courts each day that week. And as he taught, he pushed harder on his religious reforms, challenging those same religious leaders again and again. And it's in this context that he says to them, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside are full of bones of the dead and all kinds of filth. And if you go to the last paragraph before it's declaring the Passover Seder here on page 17, he says, with every charge and challenge, Jesus further angered the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. The tension grew each time he entered the temple. By Thursday, it was clear the city's religious leaders were plotting to put him to death. And last Sunday, you remember I referred, his time had come. And you remember in John chapter 2, Jesus' first miracle, he turned the water into wine at Cana. And remember, his mother said, he said, hey, we've run out of wine. Can you do something? The good wine's gone. And he said, woman, my time has not yet come. Juxtapose that, there, I can't say it again, against what today, this week, these last 24 hours, his time has come. And he knows it, which leads us to the Garden of Gethsemane. He goes in the Garden of Gethsemane. I think one of the books actually tells us that he sweats blood. Is that true? I think it says that. And so he was in deep anguish. And that leads us then to our video today. So let's go ahead, and he actually covers the verses in the video, so we don't have to read it. So he'll cover it for us. So let's go ahead and watch this video. It's not very long this morning. Last Sunday was a little longer. And I think we fixed the sound today. Figured it out. Should be better today than it was last Sunday.
Today we continue our study of the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. The purpose of these videos is to supplement the material in the book and to help you see the events described in the Gospels in new ways. Following the Last Supper, near midnight, Jesus led the disciples down Mount Zion, across the Kidron Valley, and to an olive grove at the base of the Mount of Olives. He had prayed with them there many times before. To their left as they walked was the temple, towering over them. To their right, the graves of prophets, priests, and kings. Mark tells us what happens next. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake. And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. Part of the power of being in the Holy Land as pilgrims is that you have the opportunity to place yourself in the story. You can stand among the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane where Peter and John fell asleep and while Christ agonized. You can kneel at the rock formation where tradition says that Jesus threw himself to the ground and prayed for this cup to pass from him. So let's go visit the Garden of Gethsemane and the Church of All Nations, also known as the Church of Christ's Agony.
That's Christ's agony.
It was about 11 o'clock at night when Jesus and his disciples left the upper room, having celebrated their Passover Seder. They took the torches and they walked across the Kidron Valley once more down from the upper city and to this place, the olive grove. This is known as the Garden of Gethsemane, and Gethsemane means olive press. And it was here that Jesus came to pray, to agonize, to be tempted and tested once more, and to finally fully surrender his life to God's will. This is the oldest tree in the Garden of Gethsemane. 3,000 years old, some scholars believe. It was here for 1,000 years when Jesus came to pray on that night of his agony. And tradition says Peter, James, and John knelt at this place, While Jesus went on ahead to pray in his agony, and you remember that it was here they fell asleep, Jesus came back and asked the question, could you not even stay awake for 1 hour to watch and pray with me? And that begs the question, are there moments in our lives when we, like Peter, James, and John, have disappointed God because we were not able to stay awake and watch and pray, because we weren't careful to continue to walk in his path, or we walked away from him when he needed us most? As we hear this story and we remember this tree, we ask that question of ourselves, when have I been like Peter, James, and John, unable to stay awake and watch and pray with the Lord? I hope you'll consider in your discussion of today's reading the ways in which you've struggled as Peter and James and John did that night. They struggled to remain awake when Christ most needed them. How have you struggled when he most needed you? Now, Jesus went a bit farther into the garden to pray that night. Agony is an appropriate word to describe what he was feeling. Mark tells us he threw himself on the ground and prayed that this hour would pass from him. When you visit the Garden of Gethsemane, you're meant to identify with his agony. Jesus began his public ministry being tempted by the devil. And in the temptations, the devil questioned Jesus, in essence saying, if you really are the Son of God, then prove it. And then he offered Jesus another way, a way to avoid the suffering of the cross. He offered him the riches of the world if he would abandon his plan to save humanity. Here in the garden, I believe Jesus was being tempted once again. That the devil had to have been saying once more, are you really sure about this? Do you know what you're doing? Are you really going to leave these hapless disciples to run things when you're gone? Look, they're sleeping right now as you pray. You don't have to suffer, Jesus. You don't have to die. Just run. Now, when you visit the Garden of Gethsemane, and particularly when you enter the Basilica of Christ's agony, you're meant to enter this story and to join with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Antonio Barlucci was the architect who designed the current church building, which sits atop the ruins of 2 previous churches built on the site to commemorate the agony of Christ. Barlucci wanted to take worshipers back to that night. Upon entering the church, your eyes have to adjust because it's intentionally quite dark. Look up and you'll see the stars in the ceiling. You've been taken back to that night. Look ahead and you'll see the large mosaic of Christ kneeling before a rock in prayer. And below the mosaic, the rock formation Christians have visited since at least the 300s, perhaps earlier, remembering these events. Pilgrims are invited to kneel around the rock, to touch the rock, and to remember and to pray with the Lord, not my will, but thy will be done. Is it coincidental that both Christ's agony and Adam and Eve's temptation occurred in the garden? In Eden, the question for Adam and Eve was, our will or God's will? They chose their own will and turned away from God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus, whom Paul calls the second Adam, was tempted and tested once more. But his answer was quite different from Adam and Eve's. His answer was, not my will, but thine be done. Every morning I begin each day on my knees, and I pray some variation of that prayer that John Wesley taught the early Methodists to pray. This is the prayer I prayed when I knelt at the rock in the Basilica of the Agony. And I'd like to invite you to join me in saying this prayer aloud.
We're going to pray this to end the class today.
I am no longer my own, but thine. Put me to what thou wilt. Rank me with whom thou wilt. Put me to doing. Put me to suffering. Let me be employed for thee or laid aside for thee. Exalted for thee or brought low for thee. Let me be full. Let me be empty. Let me have all things. Let me have nothing. I freely and heartily yield all things to thy pleasure and disposal. And now, O glorious and blessed God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, thou art mine, and I am thine. So be it. And the covenant which I have made on earth, let it be ratified in heaven. Amen.
Pretty powerful stuff. Any insights to the video? Any questions, comments? pilgrim, which all of us are if we go to the Holy Land, allows you, so approaching the Holy Land as a pilgrim allows you to place yourself in the story, to imagine yourself trying to stay awake under the olive tree, or to kneel at the very place Christ may have thrown himself down on the ground in agony. I think I said last week, Hamilton stresses it again a couple times in his book, The Timeline, that they were there from usually the Seder meal, even today, goes from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. And he says they probably went to the garden about midnight. So they've been celebrating the Seder with Jesus for 4 hours, and it's very exhausting physically, I'm sure, and mentally, because he knew his time had come and he's trying to convince them of the same thing. And I think they were probably feeling a little good too, because you usually drank 4 cups of wine during the Seder. So you add the wine to the exhaustion, the physical, the sheer exhaustion, to the time of the day. I can't be sore at Peter, James, and John falling asleep when Jesus went away to pray. No wonder, they were sleeping it off. Not just the alcohol. I'm talking about just everything. It was so overwhelming. Till I remember, Jesus told them, I'm about to leave. Don't go away, Lord. We're going to be all alone. And then he promises them what? The Comforter, the Holy Spirit will be with you. And he will teach you all things and tell you what to say. So that's one of the points. Second point he makes is Jesus began his public ministry by being, back to our point earlier about temptation, Jesus began his public ministry of being tempted by the devil. Here in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was tempted once again. Quote, and this is a direct quote out of our book today. You don't have to suffer, Satan said to Jesus. You don't have to die. And you can imagine Satan saying to him, just run. More on this later. Another point. The Church of All Nations was designed to take pilgrims back to that night in the garden. The interior is very dark. Ceiling full of stars to take you back to that night. Below a large mosaic of Christ kneeling in prayer is a large rock that pilgrims, you saw him kneeling before it, and you can actually touch that rock. Very, very powerful. Very powerful moment if you had to go to the Holy Land. I don't think on our trip to Jerusalem, to Israel, that we went there. I don't remember going to that church in the Garden of Gethsemane. The only thing I remember about the garden, about the hill of Mount of Olives, is we were there and I got on board a camel to ride it and it took off running with me on it. Only me. And the guy who was the Arab guy who was in charge of the camel running back behind, chasing the camel, cursing in Arabic. And there I was. Don't think we went to that church. I don't remember. I don't remember the stars and the rock. Anyhow, a final point that he makes in the video is in both the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Gethsemane, which, the garden which we said means winepress, the crucial question was God's will or not. In the garden, Adam and Eve had to choose between good and evil. They had a choice. And we know what they chose. And the results of that. Original sin. In the garden, God's will or not, Jesus was presented with a choice. And did he not say, if it be thy will, some of the versions say, let this cup pass from me. And the cup being what? The cup is speaking of what? Yes, the cross. Yeah, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. But nonetheless, what did he say? 41, Hamilton connects Jesus' agony and sorrow to his later cry on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? In the past, when you heard this, and he does it, bottom of page 41, some Christians in explaining Jesus' agitation and sorrow in his, bottom of page 41, and his later cry of dereliction from the cross, suggest it was not a result of fear or lack of confidence in the plans of God, or even a desire to avoid torture or death. Instead, their view of Gethsemane and Jesus' resuscitation of Psalm 22:1 from the cross reflects a particular view, theological view, of the atonement. And they say, and he talks about how God, being so holy, cannot face sin. Because Jesus on the cross took away all the sins of the world. And so he says here, they suggest that when Jesus was hanging on the cross, God placed on him all the sins of the world. At that moment, they teach, God turned his face away from Jesus, and there was for the first time a separation of the Father from the Son. It is said that this turning away was necessary because God is holy and could not look upon the sins of the world when they were placed upon his Son. What do you think about that? Doctrine of atonement. Does that help explain his words on the cross? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? I think it does. I think it helps explain why he said those words.
But he thinks that, but did God really do it? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. No. But back to what I said earlier, after much discussion, Hamilton makes a very insightful reflection that perhaps in the midst of all of our questions about why Jesus uttered these words and why he's in such agony, became agitated to the point of grief, is that at the end of the day, he was human. Turn to page 45. And Hamilton, at the top, first paragraph on page 45, at the top, I believe, says Hamilton, that these two explanations for Jesus' anguish may account for the mental suffering he experienced, but we dare not miss the obvious reason for his agony in the garden. Can we allow Jesus to be a person?
Yes.
That's what he asks. Hasn't the church always asserted that in Jesus God has become, quote, fully human? Did Paul not say that in Jesus the Son had emptied himself of his divinity in some meaningful sense in Philippians 2:7? What would you be feeling if you knew that within a few hours you would be tortured, publicly humiliated, and subjected to one of the cruelest, most inhumane, painful forms of capital punishment ever devised by human beings? What if you knew that your death would be both the possibility that terrible atrocities would be committed that you might have prevented? Can you sense the anguish Jesus must have felt? Oh, yeah. Very well put, I think, and very insightful. And that brings us, any thoughts before we move on and close? Any thoughts about what we just read about Jesus' humanity, about the atonement, about maybe reasons why Jesus did say what he said on the cross?
Because it does show his humanity.
No, I think when he says, what would you do? Put yourself in his shoes. What would you do? And it makes you kind of question your own faith, because I think all of us would have, in the interest of self-preservation,
Done what Satan told Jesus to do in the garden.
that would have been, I think, it makes you really dig deep and think, because we do have that survival instinct, and if you knew something's coming, you bug out.
It's kind of like what Janet shared with me this morning. They were in Alabama picking up a truck, and when they read about these storms coming, she said, "What? We got out of Dodge." That's what she told me. Yep, we got out of Dodge. That's what we would have done, I think.
So it really makes you think. It makes you think what you should do in your own tough situations. Fight or flight. That's a big. So I think it really. I read that passage many times and just thought about things.
Yeah, it makes you think. It's very deep. Shows his humanity. Any else? Does someone else ever want to say something? No? Okay, so let's then go, and Hamilton closes by briefly discussing